In this video, we'll discover props, which act like conduits, letting parent components pass data to child components in a one-way data flow. Let's get started. You could have a component that fetches data from an API and stores it in its own state. As soon as the state is updated with this data, the UI renders to display the data on the screen. But since state is local and encapsulated within a component, how do you share this data with other components down the hierarchy? A typical React application is made up of several components, and there has to be a way to share state data between them. While we have multiple techniques to share data between components, the most fundamental way is by using props. Here's a coffee machine. It requires freshly ground Arabica coffee powder and water to brew a hot cup of coffee. Consequently, this machine has two inlets, one for the coffee powder and one for filling up water. Likewise, props are inlets to a component. They offer a simple way for parent components to pass data to child components. In terms of usage, props are like standard attributes on a component and can be bound to dynamic data using a pair of curly braces. Inside a class component, props can be accessed using this.props.prop name. Here you can see a prop named location that is used to feed a location name to a class component that fetches and displays weather data. You also have components that feature an opening and closing tag. Such components can provide augmented features to child components by acting as a wrapper. In such components, you can access and render child components using a special prop called children. Here, the super dialog component renders a dialog box around its enclosing contents. Here you can see the enclosing contents being received using the special children prop in a function component and rendered as a part of a new layout. When working with function components, all props are received using a single object as an argument to the function. Therefore, the children prop, like any other prop, can be extracted using destructuring. Props aren't rocket science and are truly simple to understand and use. But there are some important facts and features that you must keep in mind when using props. Let's see 5 important points that you must keep in mind when using props. The first thing to note is that props enable you to implement top-down one-way data flow where quite simply data is generated or stored in a parent component and is passed down the hierarchy using props. This one-way data flow schema is at the heart of component hierarchies in React. This also means that in a hierarchy of components where state data is to be used, the state should always be situated at the nearest logical parent. This practice is commonly referred to as lifting the state up, and it results in logical maintenance and management of data. The second important aspect of props is that they are read-only. This means that your components must act like pure functions and should never change or modify data in the props. For example, this should never be done. If you have to modify data, then store it in the state and modify it there, or use a simple variable in the render method to achieve the same. The third point to remember is that if you do not pass any value to a prop, it defaults to true. In this example, the value of the uppercase prop defaults to true. It is generally not recommended to leave props without values though. The fourth point to remember is that you can also set default props by using the notation you see on the screen. This is useful when props are optional, such as configuration props for a reusable component. The last and final point to remember is that when you set a prop using double or single quotes, the value will be treated as a static string and not as a dynamic reference to a variable or a non-string entity. If you wish to pass dynamic data such as numbers, an object, or even functions, then you need to use curly braces. Okay, we have seen how data flows from parent to child components using props. But what if you want to send data back up to a parent? Remember this example from the previous video where we incorporated local state in a function component using hooks? We implemented a prop in the code input component named onSet, which is a function that offers data when someone types in the input field or when we click the generate button. This is how you can implement an inverse data flow and send data back up to a parent component. By implementing a function in a prop, you can easily send data back up to a parent component. This is required when we want our child components to process and return data back up to the parent, or when the component generates some data of its own, such as in the code input example here. This function, an anonymous arrow function, naturally comes without its own bindings and is thus able to access instance methods on the parent, such as the this.setState, allowing you to consume the data received from the child component. So there you have it. Props let you implement one-way data flow conduits that are easy to use and help you create reusable components. Now, when developing components and building large apps, you might end up passing data to a prop in a type that it doesn't understand. For instance, what if you pass a string to a prop that expects the value to be a number? Such instances can introduce unwanted bumps in development and calls for type checking props so that you can be absolutely sure you're passing the right type of data to a prop.